everybody. Welcome to Toasted the podcast. We are here today and super excited to celebrate the Bills' victory over the Patriots. What an exciting game. We are recording this shortly after the big win, so we are thrilled about that. So go Bills. And Damar Hamlin, number 3. It has just been awesome cheering you on this whole time and seeing all the number 3s on everybody's uniforms. The number 3s outlined in blue or red on all NFL fields today, and then the opening, he was there with his family and still in the Cincinnati hospital. But I think everybody was a Bills fan today. So I'm sure my sister, who's a Patriots fan, is going, no, that's not true. But everybody was a Bills fan today. I've declared that. So there we are. So that's my big intro, Nick.
Wow.
So I'm going to toss it over to you now. What?
You have a sister who's a Patriots fan? How did I not know this?
Sometimes you just have to love people where they are, as misguided as it might be.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah. She tried to give me a Patriots cup as like a housewarming gift when I moved into my townhouse, and I was just like, "What are you putting in my cupboard? What are you putting
she
in
snuck
my cupboard?"
it in.
I'm like, I'm like, you can take that piece of taboo right on out of here. Yeah. So, So she's a Pats fan, and you know what? And she's a Pats fan. She's not a Tom Brady fan. She's a Pats fan. So like when Brady went to Tampa, she roots on for her Patriots. So, there's loyalty. And if you ask her, she'll say like, I like, she likes all things New England. She likes the uniforms. She likes the colors. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So like I said, you have to love people where they are at. Yeah. So yes. So I won't rub it in her face or anything that the Bills won. Yay.
Right. Okay. It's really great to be always great to get back on the podcast and record. And it's funny because sometimes you feel like tired or whatever, your days kind of drag you down. And I'll admit out loud that sometimes like getting ready to record the podcast is a little stressful for me because I had to make sure all the tech works. And, I try to make it as seamless as possible for everyone. And, but then we sit down to record, and it's usually such a great experience that I leave and wish that I had another one to do tomorrow. But alas, we're here today. And we are here with a very special guest, Allison Whiting, who I will allow to introduce herself. But I just wanted to really wish you a warm welcome from us at Toasted, because we're so happy to have you here. So, Allison,
very much so. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, tell us a little.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so let's see. I guess Nick, you and I met because our kids were at Bloomfield School, and so that's kind of how we connected. My background, so I own a company called Intent, and it's all about aligning people and strategy. I've been an independent consultant for over 20 years now, just over 20 years. I guess I was lucky and fortunate that pretty early on in my career, I had an opportunity to meet some really great mentors and people that sort of helped and guided me to sort of find my natural genius. I don't know if you find this where you've got those things that you're good at and you're naturally good at, but yet they're so natural you don't necessarily even recognize that that's where your talents lie. But I finished my degree in business and then got a secondary education degree from out in Michigan. And while I was in the schools, I really enjoyed what I was doing, but thought I wanted to go out into industry. And so that's kind of where I began. Ended up working through a variety of experiences and mentors. Really, my first position kind of in this line of work was in the automotive industry. So I worked for a tier 1 automotive company in Detroit. It happened to be a cool side of automotive because we had a tech center and did concept cars, and we did kind of first run programs for we were the first company to put TVs in cars. So like we would build a plant and we would do that before we would hand it over to the automotive companies. But anyway, I was lucky enough, wasn't really looking for anything at the time, but one of my contacts, that particular company was one of his customers, and they were looking for someone to come in and do corporate training. And so he had given my name, and I said, no, I'm not interested, but please go ahead and do the interview. And so I went through the process, ended up getting this position. And it was really my first exposure to what my work is now, which is building culture and helping organizations be really intentional with what's important and where they are and how do we engage people in order to make things happen. And so in that role, I was part of the quality department, and then I was also involved with HR, and we had a new CEO at the time, actually, and they were trying to figure out, how do we stay competitive in a really competitive marketplace. And of course, this was many years ago, but it was before there was as much focus on people engagement and really from the bottom up, having everyone involved in these change initiatives. And so, my role was to figure out what those programs were, and then be one of the people implementing it, following up on it, and really seeing truly, it's intuitive and of course more commonplace now, but the power of people, and when they're working together with that common purpose, and they're very intentional, and they're empowered to make those right decisions, what an impact it can have on a business's bottom line. And so at the time, we didn't call it culture work, but it really is all about culture and people and engagement. And I always, when I'm with groups of people or in different organizations, I often tell that story because it was so long ago that really shaped the work that I do today and have done over my career. Then I moved out, which is why I'm in the area now. I moved out to Syracuse, New York, and was through some contacts, worked for a startup.com that was kind of, I would say now, ahead of its time. We had an online presence for young professionals, which included online mentoring and some job placement tools and interviewing tools, but it also had a training and development arm for young professionals. So we would have speakers and have like high potential young professionals come in. And I went from a bigger company to a really, much more of a startup, and met some really wonderful people in the area. I don't know, Nick, if I've shared this with you, but my husband happened to be from Rochester, although we weren't together at the time. And, he would take me to different places around here. I loved this region. I really liked Syracuse as well. And ultimately, we decided to make this home. So it was about 20 years ago that I relocated, and we've been in Rochester ever since. And my work has evolved from not just I guess it started in large transformation, and it's taken many different forms over the years, certainly has continued to evolve through the pandemic and kind of post-pandemic and where we're at today. And so that's my story. It's kind of the quick version, the long version, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now, within that, when did you start Intent? When did you become, your own independent?
I would say it was probably 2001 or 2002. And I will say I rebranded to be Intent just a handful of years ago. But I went independent. This is kind of interesting when I moved to Rochester. So my father-in-law was this really incredible entrepreneur. He had his own business. Interesting story. He never went, I think he went to like boarding school, never finished high school, but he was brilliant. And he built a tree house with an elevator. He has built a tunnel in his house, all these interesting things, but he was an entrepreneur. And so I had come from a corporate background. And when I moved out here, he kept saying to me, Allison, you need to row your own boat. You need to row your own boat. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like in my 20s. I don't even know how that's possible. I never was raised with people that were entrepreneurs. But he really pushed me to do it. And I guess what happened is, fortunately, because of the network and the great people I'd met as we were in fundraising and working with the Syracuse community, one thing leads to another. And when people kind of heard my story and the fact that I was relocating, I really was introduced and so blessed to run into a lot of really wonderful people who took me under their wing. And so my first, while it wasn't called Intent when I was independent at first, we were doing a lot of big transformation work. And I found some other people that were more established that I could work with and connect with and still bring those skills into these different organizations that really needed it.
That's awesome.
That is fascinating.
I have to tell a story that I hadn't thought about in a little bit, but Allison and one of my other colleagues, Dan McKelpin, and we would have these discussions, right? And it had to be difficult because I am a big ideas guy. Dan was much better at like taking my big ideas and putting them into like, he'll laugh when he hears this because he's an avid listener too, but bulleted lists. He wouldn't read anything. Yeah. Dan would not read anything from me unless I bulleted. It had to be like, he wouldn't read a paragraph. If it was in a paragraph, he wouldn't read it. So I had to put it in like individual sentences. And I used to harass him for it. But that was kind of like the way that he could think about it. And so it worked out really well. We ended up being a really good pair of thinkers. And we pulled Allison into these sometimes just kind of wild conversations about whatever particular topic we were thinking about in education, and trying to like fish for ways that we could make some of these things happen. And one time, Allison, I don't know if you remember this or not, it must have been around November. We were sitting down, we were having a conversation, and you were talking about books we were talking about books that we should read or whatever. And one of the books that came up was the Heath brothers' Power of Moments. Mm-hmm. Do you remember this conversation? And then like 2 weeks later, 2 copies of that book showed up at Bloomfield because Allison had bought them for us. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. I was so, well, it was such a cool moment because I was like, all right, this is a power thing. And then that book turned out to be super powerful, and we used it in all sorts of interesting ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. You know what? It was interesting because I think when we connected, my daughter was in 6th grade. And so we had gone from elementary school where you have a lot more interaction with the teachers and you know what's going on. And I think I had reached out to you to just ask for a meeting with her team, just to make sure we were on the same page and get ahead of it and make sure she was set up for success. And then I remember us, I think after that, chatting for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And you were newer to the building and just having such good conversation. And then, as you pulled me into some of those discussions with Dan, I just remember the creativity and kind of that out of the box thinking, which just resonated, which is so much of what we try to bring into organizations as well. So for me, it was exciting to have that happening right in our district. And I forgot about the power moments and sharing it with you, but that is such a great resource.
It's always stuck with me because, the idea that when you bring people in, I used to think a lot about that. When we brought people in, how did we give them the best experience possible? And then I think the idea that people will remember just the highlight reel of their experience, and they don't necessarily remember every detail. In fact, they don't remember every detail. I just think it's something that schools in particular could capitalize on more than they do. And that's been like kind of my go-to for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that book, the premise of it is, and I highly recommend it to anyone, it's, the Heath brothers have written a few different books, and they're just simple concepts that are so practical, but really, really powerful. And so that one in particular, we used, in fact, I just referenced it not long ago for mentors.
Mm-hmm.
How do you not just focus on goals, which is the highlight of what we do and our focus in most things, but it really is identifying those moments, whether you're developing people or creating memorable experiences so that it then drives us to those results or the performance that we're looking to achieve. And, it applies to certainly businesses and how they engage with their customers. And I think for schools, how they engage with everyone, really, students and teachers and community. And I guess it's just a bit of a paradigm shift.
Yeah. You also might have been the first person who used the word innovation, or you said, you guys are so innovative. And, you talked about power individual strengths that you didn't recognize. And I remember after you left talking to Dan and being like, did you know we were innovative? I thought we were just having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny just in that spirit of strengths and gifts. I think I used to just label it like superpower, but it's those things you do so naturally. And then the complement of other people doing other things naturally that really creates, not only it creates energy, but it also is what creates results. And yeah, I just remember, I guess maybe because sometimes you're so close to it, you don't think of it as being a gift, but also innovative, maybe because it's how you operate. But to me,
Yeah.
that conversation was really all about kind of looking at education in such a different way, and it was great.
Yeah.
So how
But
do
that
you
was
help people tap into what their natural superpowers are? How do you help them
mm,
find those natural success skills, and like what your future father-in-law said to you, like you have to row your own boat. Like, how did you figure out exactly what those skills of yours were that came so naturally that led you to say, yeah, I A, recognize this, B, I'm going to get behind it, and now this is how I'm going to use this to drive what I
mm,
choose to do.
That's a great question. I think, well, in the work that I do, I think it comes through kind of the discovery process, and a lot of the work is kind of self-awareness of thinking about what brings you
Hmm.
energy. Like I
mm,
talk a lot about energy, and I think about energy all the time. We all have those things that we love to do that we probably lean into because they're natural, and then those things, I don't know about you, but that you procrastinate on, or you just like you dread doing, and you have to do it. I know for me it's like, oh, I have to do this, and I put it off, and I do it, and I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad, but yet like
Yeah.
there are those tendencies. So I think that discovery for people of really looking at where they get their energy from, and even reflecting a bit on those patterns and tendencies from really early in our lives. I think we're taught to kind of fit into a certain box, but really, even with my own children, it's like helping them step back and really think about what they naturally do well that they might not even think of being a strength. But I often feel like that's where people do their best work and they're the happiest. So it's a bit of that. And then there's a couple other tools that I use. There's a really great new tool that was just recently released by someone named Patrick Lencioni of the Table Group,
mm.
and he has
Oh,
done
I
a lot. In fact,
love
Nick,
him.
we isn't he great? I've used his
I
work.
love The Five Dysfunctions of a Team is
Oh,
one of my all-time favorite books.
excellent. That's a lot of, so when I go into organizations, we'll do a bit of organizational health work and building culture, and we'll use the five behaviors or the five dysfunctions of a team model because it's so simple, but yet so
Yeah.
powerful. Simple in theory,
Hmm.
difficult in practice. So he's just recently
Absolutely.
released something called the Six Working Geniuses, and it really is
Mm,
a simplified version of helping people understand of those six where your natural strengths are, or your genius, where your competencies are, so those areas that we can do every day where maybe it doesn't fill us up, but we're still really effective with it. And then there's something called working frustrations, and this idea, if we are in working frustration 80% of the time, that's when you start to see people burn out or they get disengaged. So it's a really
mm,
you should definitely check it out. It's wonderful. There's a great
yeah.
assessment with it. And I've just been taking that into organizations as well, especially working teams, to understand the complement of those, and also how we can find ways to structure work based on our genius, or at least our competency, and be really mindful in the spirit of today's workplace and where people are kind of reevaluating things, how we can do our best to set people up for success and in ways that they can work with their natural strengths. So that's more of a simplified version. It's excellent for working teams. I think about my kids, and so much of it's even, conversations about what you love, and I don't know, it's kind of putting
Yeah.
that in front of people.
That's really interesting to me because
Then how did
oh, sorry, Margie.
Oh no, I say, so then how did you discover what yours were to propel
Mm,
you to make that your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I look back and I feel like one door led to the next, and there were all these little signs along the way that nudged me this direction. And maybe that's how I think. Maybe I just look for those things. I don't know. You
Hmm.
talk about failure, and I think sometimes when something happens, while it's tough in the moment, if you can pause, process, and then kind of lean into things differently, chances are on the other side of it, there's a lesson in something even better, and often more in alignment with where you're supposed to be. Um, so for me, I think I learned it, and that's often why I talk I'll share the story of very early in my career, finding those elements of my work that were just so intuitive. So I think actually even before starting in automotive, I had an opportunity to go work for a grant program that we served 7 different first generation college bound low income districts. So we had, and I managed a district just outside of Detroit. So we would put programs together to work with this population and really help them find their path, so that they could graduate on time and then continue on in a meaningful way. And so that exposed me to so much, like the 7 habits of highly effective people. And we did outdoor team building. And so we would bring these, not only student groups, but corporate groups, because I ended up doing facilitation there, into these different team building exercises and simulations. And it was fascinating for me to see what made great teams really, really excel, and what made sometimes the smartest teams really struggle, and what it would take to get past that to really be effective and high performing. And I just remember seeing the impact of it and recognizing that, wow, this makes a lot of sense to me, but how do I actually bring it into my work? And then kind of one thing led to another. And once I got into automotive in particular, it was, I don't know, it came together pretty early on.
Were you
wonderful.
conscious?
Thank you for sharing that.
Were you conscious of those elements that at the time, do you think? Or is that more something that, like, could you have put a word to it? Like, say, in your 20s, could you have said, like, I'm really good at?
No. I think that I knew that it was naturally intuitive, like everything, right?
Yeah.
You look back and you're like, oh yeah, that's what was happening there. Actually, I think it was kind of the opposite. I think I grew up wanting to achieve and feeling like there was a path. So I wasn't going to take this path, but going down this corporate path, I was just going to achieve as much as I could. And sometimes being in roles or situations that just maybe weren't as natural for me, or more a frustration point, like pushing up the hill than other people. So, but I knew the things that I did well or were easier, but I don't think I could have put language to it. In fact, I think there were times, like everyone, that you're like, oh, I'm not good enough for this, or I'm struggling with that, and you have that doubt. But when you're in, and then you just kind of find those places where your strengths come out, and there's a level of I don't know, flow to it, I guess. So yeah, in my 20s, I don't think I would have had this conversation. It was actually more recently talking with someone who was helping me with just my website, and she said, oh my gosh, this has been your life's work. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never really thought about it that way. But maybe I found it earlier than some people do. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's cool. So it's great to talk about success, and you sort of hinted at this a little bit. We sort of we like to talk about failure. I like to say that with a little chip on my shoulder, Margie. We like to talk about failure.
I noticed. Our listening audience can't see. He had this little
That's right.
If there's a way to swagger when you're seated, I don't know, but I can't think of it. He had a little swagger in his talk right there. I was like, look at you, Nick. That was hilarious.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that I'm
like
only
that
drinking.
Comment. Can you tell?
I'm only drinking ginger lime seltzer. No, I could hear my father. My father would be like, "It's probably the beer. That was why he's swaggering." But no.
No, all of us are taking this Sunday
right.
in January. Like we all, like Allison and I are drinking water. Nick is drinking a seltzer. So we're going to be cheers with us. Good hydration.
That's there we go.
Today.
But so, Allison, curious on your thoughts around failure, if there's a particular moment or story or something that you would highlight.
Yeah.
But even if it's just general thoughts, I think it's a really like you said, it's a powerful learning tool, and I think we'd be remiss to avoid it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, your interaction there, I feel like failure is something that's so hard for people to talk about. It's vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's like, but if
very hard.
I think it's wonderful that you do that on here, because the more you talk about failure, I think it makes it easier for other people to talk about it and face it and get comfortable with it. and honestly, it builds trust, and I think it builds growth. So I think it's awesome. That's kind of a piece of what you're putting out there. I was reflecting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great that that's a theme of what you're doing. I think obviously there's been so many, right? I think I grew up early on. Did you ever hear of course, Brene Brown's work on vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
and shame?
Yes.
And I really feel like she's been so groundbreaking in making some of these topics so much
Yes.
more
I agree.
approachable. I grew up kind of, not that my parents as educators put a lot of pressure on me, but hey, you can do whatever you want to do, and we believe in you. And I think somehow there was a lot of internal pressure for me, like I need to rise to the top with a corporation, and can I really do that? But I don't know that you ever really let your guard down. And so there was a lot of that, like internal doubt, but not wanting to project that or talk about it. I think for me early on, one of the failures that I think was really pivotal for me was when I was working for the startup.com. It was right around 2000 when the market was changing, right around there, and I can't remember the exact timing. And Trevor and I were in the process of figuring out what did we really want. He was pretty sure, and I tended to agree. We didn't want to move to New York City. It was great to spend some time there, but I really liked this area. We He knew he did not want to be in New York. He likes having a little more space, and we love where we live. And it's so, when I left that company, I was actually on unemployment for a while. So I was, they eliminated the position, and we kind of came to that agreement together.
Mm.
But I remember Trevor and I were actually talking about this recently, about at that time in my 20s, being in that situation. And for me, and this was probably sounds ridiculous now, but I felt like I did something wrong. Like, I can't believe I'm in a situation where I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
unemployment. Oh my gosh, I have to like
Mm-hmm.
scramble and scurry. And how did I land here? And maybe I shouldn't have taken the risk to go out to work for this startup, because I really loved what I was doing when I was in the automotive company. And while we all know now that nothing is completely secure, I grew up
Mm-hmm.
feeling like security was everything. And
Sure.
all of a sudden it was like completely gone. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of talks about, oh my gosh, what do I do from here? And that was when that failure kind of paused me. And honestly, if it wasn't for my father in law and my husband and a few other people that I'd met, I probably would have, I don't know if I would have taken the leap that I did, because it was so scary and it was so unknown and I was so young. But I was just really fortunate that I met the right people. But that failure and like getting uncomfortable with it is what really was the catalyst for me to do what I do today. And I'm going to tell you, like early on, this idea of as you're
Mm.
starting, I remember my husband saying, listen, you're going to be tempted to look for other jobs, and you're going to be thinking this is not the right path, but it's going to do this. And then eventually it's going to get to the point where you're going to be so happy you made that choice. And of course, now, isn't it easy when we sit in these conversations to be on the other side of it and talk about it? But in the
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
moment, it was really difficult. And yet that was it was that sense of failure in the moment, for me, and like the
Mm-hmm.
pride around it was really challenging, and yet it ended up being one of the best things that could have happened because of the path that I chose.
Hmm.
Now, I found it interesting you used the word catalyst. I'd love to explore that a little bit more. When you said it was the catalyst, like, can you go deeper with that?
Yes.
Help us understand what you meant by that?
Yeah, I feel like well, in that moment, having, I guess it's not like it was this quick turnaround where all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And then everything was like perfection. But I feel like, and it probably often is after you're through the failure or through the tough stuff, that of course you can look back at these things. But I do feel like
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
decision point really was just this catalyst for me to go, okay, we all have choices, but it was really defining
Mm-hmm.
what that was going to look like and taking the leap. And if that hadn't happened, I'm sure the path would have been so different today. But I believe, Margie, I think
So
that this
different.
idea of catalyst, like having these moments on our paths and in our journey, and this is true for business too, right? Like if an organization has a point where something tough happens, sometimes those situations are in fact the catalyst for really positive change. And it's hard, but once you're on the other side of it, sometimes it's the best things that happen.
Oh, I completely agree. So, how did you stay motivated to stay on that path? It was your catalyst. So, we've talked about the idea of these pivots in life. You know, when you
Hmm.
make that decision and you stay the course with it. So, how did you stay the course? Like, so you're this is I'm going to pursue this, and then, like you said, it wasn't overnight.
Right.
So, how did you have that grit to stay the course with that self belief? Because I think if the self belief wasn't there, do you, or, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, do you believe that the self belief was there? Those skills we talked about early on, and the innate success skills, that the things that you naturally do that fuel you and feed you. How did all that come together so that you stayed the course until it was like, hey, I'm looking back and I have enough time now that I can look back and say, yeah, this was absolutely the right decision.
Hmm. Oh, I think it was a journey. It was new. I was in a new place. I was exploring new things. I was wearing a hat, that was so different than what I had done before. I think if my husband was sitting right next to us right now, he'd be like, "Oh, let me tell you, it wasn't easy." Because that's the thing, is those bold,
Well, because you said you were in a whole new place. So
right?
it wasn't like you had family right there or a friend group or this, that. So that had to be really, really hard.
It was hard. And it was hard to not, like, we would travel back to my family and I would see, Detroit's a very big area with a lot of big companies. And I would say it was a few years when we would go back, I'd often think, oh gosh, maybe we should think about relocating, or maybe I should think about going back into a corporate job. But honestly, there were a few things that were really helpful. Certainly, having some really good people around me that were mentoring me, and again, a great relationship and support, and being able to dialogue about the tough stuff and find that grit. I also was really fortunate that I had the right people cross my path at the right time. So one particular person, his name is Tony, and he was probably he was more established in consulting, and he was the one that I worked with most closely, and we did a lot of really big transformation work. And he actually saw something in me, because of not only my experience and probably the approach that I would take, that he felt was really complementary to what the other people on the team were doing. So I was, working independently, but he was one that kind of gave me a chance to bring what I was doing into the consulting world, and kind of partner with him on some projects. And so whether you call it mentoring or, again, that synergy, I think that was really, really key. And I'm so grateful that he was one of the people that really helped, open doors for me initially to make it possible to go out on my own.
It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I think that I don't know what you'd call it. It's like, I don't know if it's limbo or some sort of netherland or whatever between like a failure, and we call this the rising through point, right? Where like you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of the failure's already happened, but this like rebirth is happening too. Like that's a really tricky time
It is.
because it's like the emotional roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
I think you talked about it, and I think Margie and I have discussed this several times as well with other guests. But like, there's just this like up and down of emotions that it's hard to really even articulate, because like you have that moment where you wake up and you're like, I can do this, and then by noon you're like, I give
Can't
up,
do
I
it.
can't do this
Yeah.
anymore, right?
Yeah.
I just
I think that's
and I don't know how you prepare for that, or how
no. I think that's such a great point. It's hard. I mean, I remember in that moment. And by the way, that was like one pivotal example, but gosh, there's
Mhm.
always there's clients that have a board change, and then all of a sudden in my world, there might be a big shift in some of the work that I'm doing. And over time, this is the great thing about aging. I think you start to catalog all these experiences and you have a little bit more resilience, or you're able to have the awareness to be able to catch it earlier. But I think there's
Mm.
an element of being like patient and gentle with yourself while you're going through it, and just acknowledging that it is
Mm.
hard. And then, perhaps for, staying focused on like what feels right, and just following that a little bit and being in flow versus resistance, which isn't always easy to do. But I've learned over the years that sometimes, as hard as you can push, you might not get the results you want. And when you learn to let go and trust the universe a little bit, it's amazing how A, there's a release, and B, all of a sudden it seems like the right people cross your path, or you have that awareness of what direction you need to go.
Mm.
Have you?
Oh my gosh, I could not agree more with that. That's exactly what my experience was when you finally let go and you just surrender to that. Like, I'm not going to go back or repeat patterns or do those things. I don't know what this next phase is yet because
Right.
it's so unfamiliar that I just don't even know. So I'm just going to allow.
Mm-hmm.
By surrendering and letting go, you're not closed off. Like you just said, you're not resisting. So you're not closed off, and you're just allowing. And there's almost like a suspension of your own evolution, because as things are coming in, you haven't consciously noticed it until all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I have these people or network, or I was connected here, and you weren't even realizing it was
Yeah.
happening, and I don't know if that was your experience also.
Completely. Yeah, you said it perfectly. And I have to say, it's taken me years and constantly working and adding new tools and being able
Mm-hmm.
to see it that way. When you're ambitious and you're an achiever, and this looks different for everyone, but this was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you feel like you should be
Yeah.
able to push through it. And I think I spent a lot of years
Mm-hmm.
doing that. And then you find those moments where you are in flow and you're confirmed, like, oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's still tough in that transition. And then, I can't even put an exact point in my life as to when that became really apparent, but there was definitely like this build up and this continuous realization. Like, if you're aware of when you're resisting and you're pushing against it, like, and you can
Mm.
recognize it and reshape it, or even if you're in that mode, to be able to pause and let it, like, be curious about it so that you can come on the other side of it a little bit stronger.
Mm.
That's fascinating. I appreciate that. That's really wise words. So, what were some of the influences for you? Would you say it was either people in your life? Did you have certain books? Nick and I are big talking about books that were influential to us, songs,
Mm.
music that helped us through these moments and things like that. So, for you, what were the things, the tools in your own toolbox that you use to help you through that rising through process, that tough stuff, to allow that flow, to get in that space? So what was that? What did that look like for
That's
you?
so good. Gosh, now I'm like going through my like playlist of all of my like perseverance songs. I love
Right?
that you bring that into the conversation. For me, there was a bit of like prayer and meditation early on, just like having to trust. I
Hmm.
feel like even when I was at a very, very young age, I had a very strong faith in believing that there was something bigger guiding all of it than just me. And when I would come back to that, it was like, I don't have to carry this all on my own. So there's always been that element since
Mm.
I was really, really
Mm.
small, and maybe the way I was raised or something that was just always there. Um, I would say a few key things have really played a part in my evolution. And we all know the evolution never stops. Like, we're all continuously growing. But I would say about
Correct.
12 years ago was the first time I did yoga. And yoga for me was really pivotal in
Mm.
my journey. My husband will comment that I have like a really active mind. Like, he calls it popcorn. Like, there's constantly something going on, and depending on, it was hard for me to quiet my mind. And so, when I would do
Hmm.
meditation, or I would go for a run, I've always, running, hiking, doing things like that. It was more about thinking and getting that adrenaline going, but it was not about
Hmm.
clearing my mind. And I remember people for years saying, "Hey, you should do yoga." And I was like, oh, that seems like kind of slow and not necessarily for me. And then it was one of those where it kept coming up, sort of like books do for me over and over again. I'm like, I got to do this. And so I went to a yoga class in Victor and had just like it connected for me really quickly because it was the first time. It was very active yoga
Wow.
and I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember just
Okay.
having this recognition of like, this is the first time that I'm just in the moment. And then by the time I would get done with the physical yoga practice and the breath work, when I would go into meditation, I was truly like, I was in a place I had never experienced before. And it would calm me down to
Wow.
where I go into my Mondays so much differently. And so for me, that really spoke. I know, and Nick, you can probably relate to this, like Trevor, when he plays music, he is
Yeah.
in that is his yoga. I'm always like, come to yoga with me. He's like, I've got my yoga. I pick my guitar up and I can quiet my mind. And so I think it's different for everyone, but that for me was really pivotal and starting to realize those places where you try to control and realizing that if I can quiet my mind and listen a little bit more, all of a sudden these intuitive messages or kind of flowing with things really started to happen and be really obvious in my day to day. And that was a really big pivot point for me.
Wow.
I want to. I've been thinking. This is the thing about the podcast that always blows my mind. And Margie, I can already hear the comments, but I think there's so many interesting ways in which the things that I think about randomly throughout the week kind of come together when we have these discussions with other people. And this is one of them, right? So, and like, I'm sure it's because of some astrological reason that I don't know.
I know. Here we go.
That's all right. I thought you were going to go.
Here we go.
I thought I was going to get some synchrony here, so synchronicity or something like that. I don't know, but I do want to say, because I get a little bit frustrated by the self-care discussion. Not that I don't believe in self-care, actually quite the opposite. But I think the idea of self-care, it's such a hard thing to talk about, but it's become I can't say that because I've never done that, but like, I have to go buy this thing. I was going to say a spa day thing, but I've never really done that. So I have no idea. That could actually be really helpful for somebody. And I don't want to my point is like, self-care isn't about going to buy yourself something, right? And in the same vein, and this is my anti-materialism thing, but on the other hand, it's also about having a group of things that you can rotate through. So sometimes for me, it's music, but then other times music is very frustrating and it doesn't make me feel better. And so that's when I run or I walk or you hike, and I love that you kind of threw a couple things out there, because I think the idea, I heard somebody say this recently, and that's what bothered me, was like, oh, you got to pick up this because you got to practice self-care. It's like, well, that one thing may end up just being the thing that frustrates them at any given moment, So I think having like sort of a menu of things that you can pull from.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. And right now I heard someone say, I love that you brought that up, Nick. That is synchronicity, because I had a conversation like this just recently. I find sometimes for me, like I absorb energy of the people around me, and if different groups have a lot going on, or it could be my own. But I this idea that having your different tools in your toolkit, or your grounding points, and whatever that looks like, and realizing it can be different from time to time, and people might come to it differently. Like Trevor used to say, you're like a yoga pusher. I'm like, I know, because it changed my life. And I'm like, come do yoga with me. And that doesn't happen often. And I think it's different for everyone. And even when you find that thing that works for you, I think the premise of it is just paying attention and knowing where you're at, what your body needs, or what your spirit needs, or how you need to ground in order to be able to lean into everything that's happening for you right in that moment.
Yeah. Like I built this ridiculous chicken coop the other day. And I got to be honest with you, I haven't had more fun doing anything in the longest time. I mean, it's just like an old trailer, and I built a small wooden frame, and then I stuck a truck cap on top of it. And I just had a blast. I mean, it was like some of the most therapeutic work I've done in a long time. And I still have all my fingers, so I'm really excited about that. But
Nick,
I just
That's a plus. So
I do hope to see a picture of this chicken coop because I'm a little bit intrigued by your design.
yeah, so if you follow us, on Instagram, I do need a finished picture because I did put the 3 pictures that you sent on that, and I just said, "What is Nick?" And I put, "What is Nick building?" All I put was, "What is Nick building?"
That's so
and
funny.
yeah, so it's, yeah,
Okay,
the
Allison.
best was your mom's comment.
Oh, what did she say? Oh dear.
She goes, "Something redneck." And I was dying laughing. And then she added a second comment. Sorry, Nick. Oh, it was hilarious. I was laughing so hard. So yeah, so people are wondering what you're building. And all I said was, "What is Nick building?" And I just had the 3 pictures. So
that's so funny. I had no idea you put that out there. Oh.
I know.
Well, listen.
Because you don't follow. So now Allison,
Okay,
you
I
can
will
see on, follow us on Toasted Instagram or Facebook. We have a Toasted Facebook page too. So they're on both, so wanted to make sure that we shared the.
That's really funny. Margie, I don't know if I can forgive you for that.
Oh, that's great. It's great. I do think you're right, though. It's different for everyone, right? And it's I think it's the slowing down and just finding those places where you kind of clear your mind and are doing something that's different, whether creative or what have you, so that you can come back to whatever else is with some fresh perspective. That's awesome. I didn't know you were building chicken coops now.
I think that this will be
chicken coop.
Yeah. I want chickens. I have always enjoyed doing, sort of, I don't want to say farm work because farmers really work. That's a different level. But like to have my own eggs.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But, so this spring I'm going to have some chickens. I'm really excited.
That's awesome.
Allison,
we should have a naming contest
for the chickens.
Yeah, gotta name them.
I
You have to name the chickens, Nick.
Number 1, number 2.
I'm with
Allison,
you.
You're on my side, right?
I might even. You could even, put that in your Instagram, and we could come up with creative names for your chickens.
Yes.
When my son Virgil, my youngest, was, he was pretty small. We had chickens and he insisted that we name them. And so he said, "Dad, what are you going to name yours?" And I said, "Sesame." And he goes, "Sesame chicken?" And then he started laughing.
I love
that. Just another example of how you have to be careful with your kids.
Awesome. Oh, well. It's really good.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Allison,
so being a Detroit native, have you ever?
No, that was all new to me when I moved out. More to the country, and never any chickens or goats or horses and things like that. Although I love that people have them, and we can get so much fresh food around here. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do want to. Because Allison, in addition to all the other cool stuff she does, is also a huge supporter of music, local music. Do you want to talk about that?
I can say something.
Now that I set you up?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, on top of my business and everything that I do through Intent with local and national companies. My husband being a musician and I don't know I guess it started, we host music in our home, it's called the Timber House. And so we bring national artists in and they play in our timber frame home. We designed it based on the Lee Van Helm rambles. So we were fortunate enough, before Lee Van Helm passed, to go to a few shows and thought it was like the coolest music experience ever. And so we were, enjoying that, met a lot of music loving folks and just thought it was like the best thing ever. And then one day we were in our house and I had a couple girlfriends over and we were having a glass of wine and we brought up the fact, I think when we were there, I said to Trevor, like, gosh, we could do this in our home because we have the post and beam house. And when my friends were over, one of them said, well, I'm going to see if the artist that's on Pandora will come play at your house. And so 3 days later, she contacted me and she said, "Hey, I reached out and we're going to have this artist named Danny Schmidt come in March to play a show." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have no idea what we're getting ourselves into." And so we mostly invited friends and sold tickets, and the artists loved it. Everybody that came loved it. And that was probably 7 or 8 years ago now. So we've been doing these house shows for quite a long time. And what's really cool, kind of in the spirit even of what we were talking about earlier with just energy, I guess, music is a give and take of energy for sure. And when we bring people together, it's
Definitely.
like the energy coming from the artist to the community and the community back to the artist is just a really powerful thing. So we've hosted all sorts of different musicians from all over, a couple from Europe and variety from around the country. And it's just been a really, really fantastic bright spot for us.
Well, you had Amy
Yeah,
Helm
Amy
there,
Helm
correct?
came, I would say it was like a year ago in January, maybe, or in the fall. She was
Mm.
phenomenal. And that was really cool because, of course, we built this sort of based on the inspiration of what she's created and what she did with her dad, which is awesome. So, yeah, it's been a fun journey. It's like our little side
So
project.
cool.
We just became a nonprofit in the last couple months, actually. So, kind of dreaming about some other things we can do and ways we can support and continue to create a space where artists can play and also we can compensate them well and just have this like give and take so they can keep on keeping on and do what they do. So it's been a ball.
Yeah.
I know, Nick,
Well, I just wanted to
I
highlight
don't
that.
think you've been to a show yet, have you? You might have to.
Yeah. I haven't, and somehow I actually love it. Amy Helm, and I mentioned my son Virgil. His middle name is Helm, so it's Virgil Helm formerly.
Wow.
Yeah. He would have been Virgil Kane, but I couldn't swing that one. So, yeah, but I really want to get over and catch a show.
I'll keep
for
you
sure.
in the
That
loop
would be
for sure. It's
that'd be
been
really
fun
neat.
to have that. It's kind of just another little thing we do to bring people together.
Yeah. Are you on Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah,
or anything
it's
for
the Timber House is our Instagram. So we're not on Facebook, but we are on Instagram. And people typically they sign up for our mailing list, and our tickets sell out pretty quick. So you have to be on the mailing list to do it, to get the link and all of that kind of stuff.
I'm pretty sure I checked you guys out like pre-pandemic or something. I
Yeah.
really think that there was. I definitely remember looking at that and thinking like, this is fascinating.
It's really,
then,
it's been really fun.
the
It's
pandemic.
interesting because I usually, kind of keep my professional life and my personal life separate. Not that those things don't intermingle, but a couple times recently I was at a client not too long ago and the CEO came up to me and this was like our third meeting with his leadership team. And he goes, "Oh my gosh, Allison, you've been holding out on us." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "We found you and you did that XXI interview related to the Timber House. How did we not know you do this?" And so it's funny, like a few times recently, those things have been coming together, which is really, really amazing because, it plays such a part in not only musicians, but I think it's something kind of neat that we're doing in the community too. So Margie, you're welcome to come too.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we were originally saying, that feeding your soul.
Yeah.
Oh, yay. Thank you. I would love to. Definitely. I'll bring friends. And but it's that feeding your soul, that creativity, the feeding your soul for the hard times when you're making those, you're making sure that you're nourished. So during those times when there's a bit of a famine, you have something to draw on.
And reaching for those things. Just one other thing Trevor always says. In fact, it's funny, I have a word sitting on my desk that I pulled out right before this conversation, but the word is authentic. And I think it goes back to so much of what we're talking about, with your natural genius and being authentic with that. And one of the things Trevor often says about what we do with the Timber House is, we don't do it to make money, but we're doing it just to be authentic and just to create that space. And I think, Margie, it goes hand in hand with what you said of, finding those places to fill your soul. And that's exactly what it does.
Well, thank you. And I think that by filling your soul, you're filling other people's soul. and you're sharing. And
Yes.
that's that synergy. That's exactly what it taps into, is the synergy of community, the synergy of connection, the synergy of authenticity. And by, doing that and sharing it with everybody, I mean, that's a huge thing to be doing. And it feeds you, but it feeds others, and it just keeps it
Yeah.
going. And that's
Yeah.
just
It's
so
sort of like
beautiful.
what you're doing with your podcast, right? It's this idea of,
Aw.
filling souls and creating space. And I think that's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Hey, one
Bring
last
people
thing
together.
before we cheers, Allison.
Thank you.
We talked about where folks can find you for the timber frame,
Yes.
but what about
Timber House. Timber House. Yeah.
Timber House. Sorry, I'm sorry. But yeah, what if somebody wanted to find you for
Yeah. So it's,
intent? Where do
I
they find you?
am on LinkedIn, so you can find me either under Intent or Allison Whiting. And I'm also, my website is alignwithintent.com. So we talked a lot about some of these concepts that have been part of my life's journey in terms of synergies, and all of these different things end up being a component of what we're bringing into the different organizations, and just being so intentional with how we lead and how we build culture and um, how we create opportunities for people and really build meaningful companies. So I think all of this goes hand in hand. But yeah, alignwithintent.com, and there's a lot more information about the work that's being done and some of the clients that I've been working with.
Awesome. Well, hey,
Oh, it's been
You
wonderful
too,
getting to know you,
Margie.
Allison. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thanks so
for
much
being
for
with
having
us.
me. I'm Nick. Thanks for reaching out and making the invitation. And so much fun talking with
Yes,
the two of you. Hopefully, our paths will cross again.
I think so.
definitely.
I think so.
Absolutely, they will. Yes. Yeah, you're stuck with us now. You're stuck like being asked
That's
to
or
come
right.
at the
back,
or
and
at the
you'll
Timber
be like,
House.
oh my gosh, it's Nick
You
and
can come
Margie
over
again.
and
Yeesh.
hang out, and then
Yes, that
we
would
can
be
talk
so
more
fun.
there too.
Absolutely. That sounds great.
Love it. Love it.
All right. Well, we need to let you get back to your life and family, so we're gonna do that and say a quick
All
cheers,
right.
and we'll head
Cheers.
out.
Thanks for
So,
your
Cheers.
time.
cheers.
Yeah.
Have a
So
great
raise the
week.
glass.
Thanks for having me.
You too.
Take care.
You too.
Happy New
Cheers.
Year. Go
Happy
Bills.
New Year.
Bye.
Go Bills. Go Bills.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.